This is Local Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance in the Inland Empire today, joined by Mike Soubirous. He is a member of the Riverside City Council. As you know, another city in the Inland Empire, Adelanto, is taking an approach towards cannabis that is different than many others. They are basically doubling down on cannabis, and they are inviting the indoor cultivation of cannabis. They're looking at whether they want to have medical dispensaries, maybe even recreational dispensaries. That's juxtaposed to Riverside, which was the city that went to the California Supreme Court to allow it to have, as a matter of land use, the right to exclude dispensaries.
Such as liquor stores or stripper bars. Or
Right. But Riverside was a city that voted in favor of Prop 64.
Yes.
The whole state voted in favor of Prop 64, which is legalizing marijuana. So where is Riverside now? On this issue?
At about 54%, and some of the wards it goes between 52 to 56, depending on the ward. It was a pro recreational marijuana vote, as we all know. It's interesting because just 2 years before we had this Measure A that was promoted by somebody that wanted to put in about 10 different dispensaries around the city. It would have tied the city's hands on a number of fronts, but what was interesting is it was soundly defeated almost by 60%. You know, or anywhere between the 58 to 60
But it
range.
was 2014, which was an off-year election, arguably more conservative. So it's hard to know exactly where we come down on that. But again, I go back to this question that the Riverside City Council took a very strong stand against medical marijuana dispensaries, went to the Supreme Court, 7-0 in favor of land use. What do you do now? I mean, look, you got a lot of land. I know that marijuana plants are thirsty, but you know, you got warehouses.
Absolutely.
That's what Adelanto's doing. They're doing indoor cultivation with these warehouses. I mean, it could be a good thing.
It could be, and I know that the council has had a number of updates on the marijuana policy coming from the state, and there's no policy yet as far as the taxation and the health and safety codes and stuff. We expect to hear it possibly around September, because 1/1/18 is the big magic day that all this will be allowed to be done.
January 1st, 2018, absolutely.
Yeah, so we're kind of waiting on what the state says. At the same time, we've had a number of updates that talk about some of the different issues, being that the majority of the public in Riverside said that we want these. I'll backtrack a little bit. Probably the biggest thing that I've heard that was the complaint from the past is these dispensaries were opening up in non-traditional storefronts. Maybe it's an older house that's maybe now been deemed commercial, where you see sometimes attorney firms or a chiropractic or somebody may open up. Well, they were doing this in these type of storefronts that were just literally feet around or directly behind them was a residential neighborhood. So most of them were not opening up in a mainstream storefront, such as in a Ralph's Shopping Center or Stater Brothers or something. And it wasn't one of the extra stores next to your dry cleaner. So as a result, there was a lot of complaints that, hey, we've got spillover into our neighborhoods. A lot of kids are coming in or there's an attraction. So that really is part of the impetus as to why we got rid of the marijuana dispensaries, at least the
medical ones
in the past.
Pre-64.
Exactly. So now with the dynamic changed a little bit, and I think this is the pivoting point, I think, for Riverside will be one of two things. One is if we were to say, hey, these can only be in certain kind of storefronts. They have to be in some mainstream storefronts. We could regulate that as far as, zoning type things and make sure that they are in more traditional store areas, not some little back
relegated.
area. Yeah, and I think from most of the public I'm hearing is most of them say, look, if it was in a normal place and I didn't have to deal with it in my neighborhood, it wouldn't be so bad. So I think you've got that. I think there's more of an acceptance of it now in the city as far as some of the residents, provided they don't see the crime and some of the issues that were related in the past. And that's why the city did what they did, is because of the crime and the amount of police response calls, things like that.
So let's presume that Riverside does allow some form of sale of marijuana within city limits. Could be medical, could be recreational. You mentioned tax. What we know about taxing is that under 64, there's a 15% excise tax, there's a cultivation tax on the flowers and leaves, there's a sales tax, and then the city and the county can place its own tax on it. Some cities and counties have already done that in anticipation.
That can be problematic, though.
Right, but that's a lot of taxing, and some would say it could get to be so taxed that the black market could be more...
Which is already in place and been thriving for decades.
So but the question is, are we reaching a breaking point with overtaxation of legal marijuana?
And that's something that I've heard from a number of people that are pro selling this stuff. Is they said that if your city tax is too high, then they run to another city that taxes a little bit lower. So there's going to be a lot of competition among the cities for that. But there's another part of the market that it's going to be interesting to see how this is taxed, because it's not necessarily point of sale, and that is your grow houses that are literally huge warehouses. And I've been contacted by a number of people that are in the industry.
Similar to what's going on in Adelanto.
Because I put the word out. Well, I put the word out at a council meeting. I said, those of you that are in the audience, I'm sure are in the industry. Give me a call so I can hear the ins and outs of this. And they did, and they said, there are a lot of warehouses in Riverside right now that nobody knows that
are already growing.
And they said you don't smell it, you don't see it, it's not an issue. They stay very secure. But something else that I found that was very, very interesting is one of the guys that ran one of these told me, he says, if you have anybody approach you and say they want to grow this like in the green belt of Riverside or out in the open, they said those are complete amateurs. Because apparently there's male and female plants, and you can take a male plant and you can shake it upwind from a female plant, and you can actually destroy somebody's crop. And they brought up another interesting point is, what happens if somebody does something to destroy somebody's crop? They said, we're going to be, once it's legal to, licensed to be able to be grown or whatever, they said, we'll be coming to you to get law enforcement to go prosecute these other people. So there's a whole dynamic there that hasn't been talked about.
Speaking of law enforcement, you had been a law enforcement official as part of the CHP, which focuses on roads, and so the city of Riverside has its own police department.
Right.
Are you seeking guidance from the state in terms of what's driving while under the influence of cannabis?
Actually, that's a whole different ballgame, but the state is coming up with a lot of new game plan for that. And there's a lot of people that are the pro-marijuana group that says, well, you're probably not going to see as many as you would drunk drivers, because a lot of the people that are smoking marijuana don't drive when they're stoned, is what the claim is. But I've seen otherwise when I was a highway patrolman.
You did,
but not as many on marijuana. It's absolutely true.
But let me ask you,
didn't see quite the numbers.
When someone's drunk, even a layperson can sense it, the eyes, the smell.
Absolutely.
But when they're high, but for the smell, if they just ingested, but who knows, they may not have smoked it. Can you tell?
Yeah.
Can you as an expert tell?
Yeah, absolutely you can.
How?
The alcohol has a life of X that, and it comes out of your body at a certain point.
Sure.
With the marijuana, it's a lot different. It depends how much they smoked.
Right.
It depends on what kind of marijuana they smoked. I mean, what strength, I guess.
Right.
How it's grown. And it has a quicker peak. I mean, you get high, but then it drops off.
When someone's driving, you pull them over. When you did, how did you know if they were on marijuana?
You could usually tell by their actions. A lot of it was their persona. I mean, a lot of marijuana smokers,
But was there a slowness? Was there a...
Yes, a little bit of lethargy.
Okay,
yeah.
so then where does law enforcement go with that?
Great question, because the California Highway Patrol has been tasked with developing some type of a breathalyzer and or blood testing, because what's been done in the past is, let's say an officer says, okay, this person's under the influence of marijuana, and they go down and have them take a blood test. Breath test doesn't work for that, the current ones. So they go down and they find out that, yes, there's marijuana in the system, but they don't have something like you're a 0.10, you're a 0.08. There's been nothing ever set up scientifically for that. So that's what they're exploring right now, is to try to develop something to get some kind of a basis for that. Because what would happen in the past is, okay, you have it in your system, but then the argument in court with the attorney would be, well, it's from last week, because it stays in the system for 20, 30 days. Yeah, it stays in your fatty tissues.
Okay, I want to thank you for joining us. His name is Mike Soubirous. He is a member of the Riverside City Council. We're in Riverside today. My name is Brad Pomerance. We thank you so much for joining us on Local Edition.